College football nerds here talking Georgia and Tennessee. And before we get into all the crow eating that I know you Georgia fans are here for, which is fine because it helps our numbers, Josh and I would love to remind y'all, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Helps the channel out a lot. And we do this every video. It's important for this video because we want to mix it up with y'all in the comments. Let us know in the comments what you think the score is going to be. And let us know in the comments who you think is going to be the better quarterback in this game. All right, Josh, Georgia fans are here. They came from the Auburn video last week. They've been waiting for it all weekend, so we got to eat some crow on missing this pick. And I'm fine with that. We talked about how we would not be surprised if this game was a Georgia win. I think everybody was surprised in the way that they won. It does show the indication of, like, we don't know what's going on right now. COVID crazy, all this. But to Georgia's credit, they came out and handled their business. And we completely maybe overreacted from week one. But I want you to talk about a little bit what you saw from Georgia and why maybe we missed the pick and everybody missed this. Was it a race to just name Georgia the third or fourth best team in the SEC East and get some new blood in there, or was there something else going on? Talk about why we missed this so bad and what you saw from Georgia.
Yeah, and when we say we missed it bad, I think it's important to understand what we really missed is that Georgia came out running the ball extremely effectively, running it down Auburn's throat, building a lead quickly. I'm not really so upset that I got the pick wrong. I think I described it as a 2 out of 10 confidence pick. Where I, need to eat crow is the fact that I thought this was going to be a really competitive game. And I thought Georgia's offensive line wasn't going to be very effective. And they absolutely were. I mean, they blew Auburn off the ball basically the entire first half. Why were we wrong on that? And what was screwed up? Well, I mean, bear in mind, Georgia had 2.88 yards per carry against Arkansas. 2.9 yards per carry, roughly. Against Auburn, they had 4.49. I don't think there's any universe, no matter what you think about Sam Pittman, and I know they got some JUCO transfers and things, but they're kind of hand-me-downs at Arkansas, where Arkansas's front seven should be twice as good as Auburn's front seven. I think the reality of this game is that Georgia came out ready to play, and I even tweeted about it. Sometimes in the game of college football, you run into a buzzsaw. People had talked about how Auburn hadn't scored a touchdown. There's no second-half touchdowns in Georgia in something like 17 years, I think. And that stuff matters. I mean, in these rivalries, the emotional aspect matters. Motivation matters. It could be said that Georgia was flat against Arkansas. It could be said that Auburn was flat against Georgia. It could be said Georgia was more motivated against Auburn. I don't really know what it is, but what I will say is I can't square the Arkansas result with the Auburn result right now. I can't square Auburn's result necessarily with Georgia versus Kentucky. There are, now looking back on it, we hedged towards Florida in the preseason for the SEC East. I'm still not sure that's crazy just because Georgia, they're going to play Tennessee, obviously, in this game, and Alabama next week. Florida's got a lot easier schedule. But I'm reminded that we were really low on Auburn, and we were low on Auburn because they're rebuilding their offensive line. We were low on Auburn because they're rebuilding pieces on defense. I mean, maybe I missed that aspect of it. I just don't know. And the biggest thing is, when you look at Georgia in these past two games, there was no logical reason to explain why the results were the way they were. And I understand the quarterback situation with Arkansas, and I understand, maybe being conservative. Arkansas is just not on the same planet as Auburn in a talent perspective. So it doesn't make sense to me, but it's pretty obvious I was wrong. And what we're going to spend a lot of this rest of this video trying to poke at is, what is the explanation here? Which version of Georgia is the real version, and how is that going to apply in a matchup against Tennessee?
And we got Tennessee fans watching too, so we also need to talk about Tennessee. And one of my thoughts here is, okay, so maybe we overreacted to week one. Which is funny because we said in our week two previews we shouldn't overreact to week one because we saw so much crazy in the Big 12 and the ACC and other earlier seasons from other conferences that crazy was going on week one. People maybe sort things out week two, but we've seen Auburn be a pretty talented team for a while now. And so that to us, that game made sense the way we picked it. But Josh, we might have overreacted to week one or from week one results. Is there a chance in your mind that we're underreacting to what Tennessee did to Missouri? Because people are going to say, okay, Missouri's played 2 games, new coach, new quarterback, new everything, gotten blown out twice. Both of these games, by the way, against Alabama and Tennessee, probably bigger blowouts than the score indicated. So Missouri's trash. Let's kind of discount Tennessee. You and I talked before we started recording this. We don't believe that. So I want you to unpack that a little bit and tell me, am I wrong in thinking that maybe we're not giving Tennessee enough due because we're too focused on saying, okay, look at what Georgia just did to Auburn?
Honestly, I think we really aren't giving Tennessee enough due. And I even sent a tweet out over the weekend. I think Tennessee, if they were a little more consistent, particularly the quarterback position, if they were a better equipped team there to be able to throw the ball downfield, if they had better receivers, I'm not sure they're not better in a lot of ways than Florida. I think Tennessee at the offensive and defensive line is a better team than Florida right now. And I felt like that going into the weekend. So for me to say, are we underlooking, what they did against Missouri? I think the answer is absolutely yes. 4 yards per carry against South Carolina, or 4.5 yards per carry against Missouri doesn't sound necessarily that great. Missouri, though, they only allowed 3.1 yard per carry to Alabama in week one. They allowed, again, about 4.6 to Tennessee. Tennessee was more or less blowing them off the ball for most of that game, not dissimilar to what Georgia was doing. Missouri is a good, at least supposedly a good front seven. We're 2 games in. But the other thing I'll look at is, I thought watching Tennessee play South Carolina when I was doing some just film review trying to get up to speed because we didn't do previews for Tennessee and Florida last week. I really thought that they were controlling that game for the most part. And it was a close game due to a lot of stupid decisions from the quarterback position. How much of that was just sort of shakiness from week one? How much of Garantano sort of being a bad player had to do with the fact that, nobody's had many scrimmages and they'd had a bunch of guys out for Tennessee. We talked about that a lot. They were in a weird practice situation and all the timing and everything was off. In terms of personnel, they're very athletic on defense. Offensively, I think they have extremely good underrated tailbacks. I think their offensive line is, I'm not going to say they're better than Georgia or Alabama or Texas A&M, but they're in the conversation legitimately with those teams. With Cade Mays, with Trey Smith, they've got 5-star players in the offensive line, and really they're experienced and talented across the board. They are a very good offensive line. The only thing I really see about Tennessee as a question mark is that quarterback position, but otherwise, I don't think that Missouri game was a fluke. And I'm going to rag on you a little bit. You took a parlay, and you're going to have to confirm that you took a parlay and took Missouri, and I told you that was a bad idea.
Well, you didn't tell me that until after I took it, so it doesn't really count. I don't like anybody in week 2 giving 11.5 that doesn't have a history of blowing teams out. And to me, teams that blow out decent teams have a very good quarterback. And I'm still questionable in Tennessee's quarterback situation. The fact that they were able to maul Missouri is what we saw. And it's interesting because somebody was asking me what I thought about Missouri. And I watched both of these games that Missouri's played so far. They're not a bad team. What do you think? Just real quick. They're not a bad team. Am I wrong there?
No, I agree with you. I don't think Missouri is a bad team. I think they are offensively limited and their quarterback situation is really unsettled, but they've got a pretty good defense. They've got a pretty good offensive line, and they've got actual NFL caliber tailback.
Yeah, back 7 defensively, very good. Very good, especially safeties. Offensive line is a problem, and defensive line is a problem, and that's where Tennessee just kind of overwhelmed. But here's the thing, though, coming back to this game. So we've got question marks, and I know Georgia fans want to say they don't have a question mark quarterback. They got Heisman candidate back there now because he did okay or did well against Auburn, and he certainly did better than I expected. So he's a better weapon than I was willing to give him credit, and I'm giving him credit now. What happens, Josh, when two teams who have won their games, especially their important games to date, uh, on the backs of dominant line play, both of them, and both sides of the ball. What happens when they play one another? When you've got possibly not great, good, not great quarterback play from both sides, good, but so far not elite running back game on both sides, but excellent line play on both sides of the ball. Is it possible that we're going to see this Saturday the game, maybe not an outcome, but the game in terms of score, pace of play, and prioritization over field position that we were expecting with Auburn and Georgia?
I think that's probably the same take here. The reality is Auburn did get blown off the ball. Missouri was not particularly good on the lines. You've got to step back, and you talk about overreacting. We had real concerns in the preseason about Auburn's offensive line. They were replacing almost everybody on that line. A lot of people were very skeptical. We overlooked that, frankly, going into this Georgia game. And that was a mistake. I think it's fair to say that almost certainly Tennessee's offensive line is better. Now, is that enough? I'm not sure. But it does sort of indicate that, okay, both these teams are going to be able to push a little bit in the offensive line. And then on the defensive line, I'm not as sold on Tennessee for sure being great. I mean, they've got the pieces to be good, and I think the linebackers like To'oto is really good. But guys like Aubrey Solomon, they've shown flashes of why their talent was there, but there's reasons these guys are all at Tennessee in the positions they are. I'm not 100% on it. I'm a lot more confident, I will say, in Georgia defensively, but we knew that going in. I mean, we knew Georgia was going to be an awesome defense and probably the best defense in the country this year. That's my expectation. My curiosity is how much more does Georgia end up being slowed down when they play a team that actually, maybe they aren't as motivated as they were at the start of Auburn and they get slowed down. And then there's really two things I want to flush out. So I'll mention them, I'll let you talk about them, and then maybe we'll go back and forth. And these two concepts really are, one, you got two different quarterbacks with two different styles here. With Stetson Bennet, you've got a guy that will consistently make you the easy play. Bennet has shown that he has pretty good poise and moxie. He finds the open receiver more often than not. He makes consistent, accurate throws to guys that are fairly open, which is not a minor thing. Quick aside with that, you need to bear in mind with the Auburn game, Auburn had a starting corner out of the game with an ankle injury. They lose their starting safety to a targeting, which is fair. It's part of the game early in the game. But the reality is Auburn was out on half their secondary by the first quarter. Tennessee is going to be better in that regard than Auburn was in that game due to the specific situation with Auburn. So you've got a quarterback that probably isn't going to have the same easy throws he had. On the other side, I think Garantano does not get the easy play. He does not get the routine play. He does not necessarily make the obvious check down that you can turn into a big yardage the way Georgia does. But Garantano is a lot better at hitting the wow play. He can make any throw on the field. He can throw into tight man coverage downfield. Now, he'll miss one play or throw a stupid interception, but he'll turn around and hit a bomb that, it is an NFL caliber throw that can't really be defended. So I think those two quarterback situations, which are very much, in my view, diametrically opposed, kind of determine, the outcome of this game, given the differences in defensive play, the fact that I think Georgia is better than defensively than Tennessee. It's interesting because Garantano in some ways is well equipped to deal with how good Georgia's defense is because they really don't give you anything easy. Whereas Bennett's going to be facing what I think is a lesser defense, but also would be, not necessarily able to make the hero throw. So one team is going to be sort of taking the little chunks offered to them by Tennessee, and then Tennessee is going to be trying to steal chunks from Georgia. Both are somewhat equipped to do it, but both are not particularly good. Long-winded explanation, but I'm kind of curious on your take on that.
Well, for me, I think if this game plays out the way we expect it to, in terms of a low-scoring game that is kind of a field position game, to me, I prefer the more consistent guy. And we saw this with Stetson Bennett against Auburn, where the thing that he did, I wasn't blown away by his game, but the thing that he did that I loved, especially in the context of what you just said, I love it because he can keep his defense off the field, because he can make a 3rd and 9 play more consistently than the guy that might pop a touchdown for 70 yards because he made a hero throw, but then is more wild or more variable on, second and 9, third and 7. And to me, the name of the game in this game is going to be to get first downs, not necessarily to get touchdowns.
I agree with that. And that kind of leads into another point, which I think is interesting as well. I had talked about going into the Auburn game. The only reason I was picking Auburn was, one, I thought the defenses were ahead of the offense for both teams. Obviously, Georgia, ran the ball really well, got up early, which I'm going to get to in a second. But I thought Bo Nix was able to hit a couple hero shots and put some points on the board. One, that didn't happen. Two, really weren't in a position for that to be enough to win the game. There's an argument Garantano is set up exactly to be that kind of person as well, if this ends up being a low-scoring game. But the thing I want to lead into is, does that matter? Because is Georgia going to score low enough points that a couple hero plays are enough to win? It wasn't against Auburn, but what do we take away from that? So Georgia in the game averaged under 4.5 yards per carry. I mean, if you watch that game, and especially people that tuned in early and then checked out maybe when they were up, I imagine Georgia fans watched the whole game. Probably Tennessee fans did not. It looked early like Georgia was absolutely going to maul Auburn the entire game. The reality, just straight stats, Georgia mauled Auburn early, and in the second half, they weren't nearly as effective running the football. Now, they did not have the ball much in the second half. The second half, they only had 3 possessions, one of which ended the game. So realize they were very much burning the clock out. But in the first half of the game, there were, I think every scoring drive had at least 3 plays of 5 yards or longer running the ball. And frequently they were averaging about 7 to 8 yards per carry. And that's kind of how they came out of the gate. We talk about a lot that if you're going to have, inconsistent success, that's fine so long as the consistent parts are grouped. Like if I throw, completion, incompletion over and over, and it's sporadics where I'm constantly making and missing a throw, what tends to happen is I'll get 2 incompletions in a row and I'll punt the ball. If I can string all my good plays, be it passes or runs, in a row, then I will march down the field slowly, get first down, score touchdown. And if I have 3 great drives in a game and a bunch of lousy ones, I still score 3 times. If I've got those 3 great drives spread out along all the lousy drives, they still end up punting because, I'll get 2 first downs and then I screw up, and then I get 2 first downs and screw up. Georgia did all their good up front, and I don't know if that was emotional or what, but they were really effective early. Auburn settled down, I think, defensively and slowed Georgia down. Georgia obviously was sitting on a lead, so you have to understand that as well. But I don't know which side of those is the real Georgia. And what Stetson Bennet did offensively, 8.5 yards per attempt is really good. Now it was about 7 yards per attempt outside one catch and run. That was kind of on a bust. What he did works when you are rushing for 7-8 yards per carry. They're going to be easy throws available. There's enough to move the sticks, and you're keeping the other team honest. If Georgia is more like 4 yards per carry, then I don't know that that's really quite enough, because you're going to need to throw the ball to move the sticks affirmatively. You're going to have to get some 3rd and longs, which he had a couple of those plays, but he wasn't required to do that with any consistency. So my question to you is, which one of those is the real Georgia, or do you think it's going to be a mix of the two again? I mean, does Stetson Bennet need to be the guy that actually has to convert 3rd downs with his arm, or is Georgia going to be able to control the game enough with a run game that you never quite get to that point?
Well, I mean, we talked about this, early in the open, that these offensive lines have been dominant. So I wonder if even with 2 teams that have good lines on both sides of the ball, the offensive lines might still be ahead of the defensive lines. And that might give Stetson Bennett the opportunity to be more consistent. So I'm still encouraged by what I saw against Auburn in a highly charged event, having to early on in that game convert some long 3rd down passes to keep drives alive, which could have completely flipped the tenor of that game. So that's encouraging to me. I do want to say, though, a lot of people are maybe downplaying Tennessee because of the close game against South Carolina. Realize that South Carolina was 4 yards away from the Florida game being 38-31. They got the ball with 8 minutes left, down 2 scores in the 4th, and drove the field for whatever reason, and Will Muschamp really can't say. It took 7 minutes to get there. But that was a team that popped a couple touchdowns early. Maybe they're not as bad as we think. The flip side of this question, though, is what if Auburn really is bad? What if we're wrong about Missouri and they really are bad? Then are we back to square one with both of these teams, or have we seen enough against in this theoretical situation? Have we seen enough against them playing actual bad teams and dominating them to still feel good about what we think about these teams at this point?
I think there's some things we know and there's some things we don't. And in picking games, look, we're going to be wrong a lot. That's the nature of college football. I mean, people want to rag us and say, obviously we're idiots because we were 20, it's a 21-point win for Georgia and we picked Auburn. Well, one, we picked Auburn narrow. We didn't really think Auburn was better. I made the comment that I thought Georgia was probably 20 or 30% better than Auburn, but I thought Auburn would probably find a way to win anyway. That was where my pick was coming from. Even that, I think, was wrong. Auburn is not just 20% worse than Georgia. There's a bigger gap there. But the line from Vegas was 7 points. And there's a reason for that. I mean, Vegas, say what you will, unless there's a line that's off, and I was bringing up Tennessee, Missouri to see if, Daniel would own this. I thought that was a trap bet. And it's on Twitter. I thought it was a trap bet. Because I saw signs that Tennessee was a lot better and could have blown out South Carolina if they wanted. There are those out there. Otherwise, though, this game was not that way. I think Georgia was expected to be about 7 points better. So something's like just totally wrong with our perception of both teams, or maybe Georgia's just a lot better than we thought they were, right? Maybe this game wasn't some sort of weird result. Maybe Georgia just played, crappily against Arkansas. I'll tell you where I land with it. And I know we've done what is really a lot of rambling just because there's no good way to evaluate any of this. And we really want to establish to you guys, and I'm sure, whichever side of the fence you're on, you're thinking, here's the real reason for it. Georgia's awesome, or Tennessee's awesome, or our offensive line's awesome, or what have you. I think if you're logical, there's no way to really square away everything going on. I lean on the fact that I have trust in Georgia's defense. And that's really the one thing I know to be consistently good and has been good for the past few years. The only game Georgia really got taken to the woodshed a little bit defensively in the past few years was that LSU game last year. That was a almost uniquely good offense. I don't know if it was the best offense in 20 years or what have you, but there's an argument for it. And that's tough to do when you're in a man coverage defense and you're not getting a ton of help from the offense. But I've got trust in the Georgia defense. I don't have much trust in Tennessee's offense. They can screw up at any time. I like Chai Chandler and I like Gray a lot. That's not to say I don't like Cook and Zamir White, because I also like them. I think Georgia fans, don't take this as slight. I think they may be somewhat comparable. Just because I am that high actually on the running backs at Tennessee, these are all really good NFL caliber backs on both sides. The talent level at Georgia is higher and the capability there is higher. But Garantano, by the same account, is a more talented quarterback. All that stuff sort of gets thrown in the wash to me. I just trust Georgia's defense. And for that reason, I think Georgia does win the game. I would say probably, 24-13. That would be my pick. It's, again, low confidence, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to do enough to sort of stuff Tennessee. I think Tennessee's going to make some stupid mistakes because I just don't trust Garantano. I don't really see anything on Tennessee's sides of the ball where I'm overly confident in any of the receivers or tight ends or anything like that. I don't see any major matchup advantages offensively, and then defensively, they're good all around, but again, not necessarily stand out good. Georgia has the one elite unit in this game, so that's why I do end up where it is. The one concern I have, I will say, is Georgia's receivers. I didn't think were very good last year, and I didn't think they were very good against Arkansas. So I'm a little concerned that maybe one of the things that went wrong is that Auburn's secondary issues with the injury and the targeting ejection maybe gave Georgia an edge at receiver where they almost never have one, just because maybe Auburn was kind of deficient. And I know, again, one long play was the result of a straight bust because they're backups in the game. That may not happen, and it may be a very different game and render Georgia one-dimensional. But even if that happens, I just don't think Tennessee is ever going to have much success offensively, and their inconsistency on offense makes me think even with a great offensive line, they'll get pressure. Garantano will make a stupid decision, turn the ball over, and it's not going to take a lot for them to get behind and get buried. So that's why I'm going to say 24-13 Georgia.
And this one's running long for us, so I'm going to give my score and wrap it up. But I've got Georgia as well, but very closer than you. 2017 Georgia. My whole thought on this is I think Tennessee is a better offensive team than Georgia. I think Georgia, by a bigger margin defensively, is a better team than Tennessee. So for that reason, kind of like you were angling there at the end, if Tennessee gets behind, I think they're going to have a hard time digging out just because Georgia is that good defensively. They're elite. They might, again, be the best defensive unit in the country. But I also say this, Auburn didn't really have tape on Stetson Bennet and didn't really know what that offense was going to be, and then came into that game down to, basically for most of the game, down to players in the secondary. Now there's a little tape on the guy. Now there's a little bit of tendency on the guy. Now there's a little bit of understanding how that offense is going to operate with him at the helm. So I think that it's going to stymie their ability to come out and kind of just rage early. And they're going to have to play a full 4 quarters. For that reason, I got a close game, but still a Georgia win like you. And I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee won this game. And if they do, man, does Tennessee-Florida look interesting. All right, y'all, that's it for us on Tennessee and Georgia. Let us know again in the comments what you think the score is going to be, and let us know about the 2 quarterbacks. Maybe give us a predicted stat line for each, kind of how you think their yards, touchdowns, interceptions, that kind of thing is going to go. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.